So welcome everybody to this month's speaker series. Today I'm going to be talking about 10 years of site preservation in Nevada through analyzing the Nevada Site Stewardship Program monitoring data. I do want to thank my co-author in this, Stephen Denham. He's one of the regional coordinators for the stewardship program and has been volunteering in my office and it did a lot of the calculations that you're going to see here and a lot of the querying. So I'm not the computer genius, but he's been wonderful and been able to help me out. Okay. So for those of you who don't know about the Nevada Site Stewardship Program, the Nevada Site Stewardship Program has been around since about 2006. And I say about because there was programs before it that became part of it. But it became law in 2005, and they've set up this actual program, the one that my predecessor ran in 2006. And we work for the State Historic Preservation Office. But our job is to assist Nevada's public land managers in protecting at-risk sites throughout the state by training volunteers and assigning them to steward sites regularly and processing all their monitoring data as they go, which created an amazing database with a lot of information about the history of Nevada and how the sites fare over time. So we wanted to take that data and be able to make it into something even bigger. So just to give you an idea of how much data that is, over the years, we've had over 879 active site stewards, and that's only from 2013 to now, because before that, my predecessors had separate databases. They've done 565 visits, they've visited 565 sites, and they've done 876 site visits, and they've reported damage to sites 2,280 times. And I could read the rest of these, but you guys can all read, so I'm going to leave it there. But the ultimate thing about this is that with all the hours and miles and things that the stewards have done over the years, we had lots and lots of data to work through. Since the stewards were all over the state, we had a lot of different information to be able to look at when we decided to go and start looking at how what our data told us about the state of Nevada and preserving sites. I think I calculated it out based on mileage and steward hours. The site stewards have donated over $1.8 million equivalent of time and effort and their own funds to be able to have this program run, which I thought was pretty amazing to know. Now that's for a long amount of time. The site stewardship database was created in 2014, trying to integrate data from previous times, and we're still working on that. But it was collected data differently then. In 2014, we established the database, and we standardized the method for doing the reporting with the monitoring reports. And when we did that, it meant that all of the data from 2014 to 2024 was equivalent. So we decided if we're going to look at a snapshot of how the program is working and what the program is finding, that we would do that in that 10-year period. We will be adding to it as time goes on, but this was kind of where we started. So I just want to remind you, like, especially those of us who are scientists, that stewards are human and there's a lot of them. And the thing with that is that everybody sends in a report slightly differently. Everybody sees damage differently. Some people will see something that other people will walk right by. So we can't assume that all of the data was collected like we are used to doing scientifically by going out and being meticulous about how we're doing it. So when we're looking at this data, we have to take it with, realizing that there's some subjectiveness to the data collection. That does not mean that the stewards didn't collect the data. It just means that with the when I have to start doing scientific calculations of errors, that's when it becomes an issue. But in reality, we still can learn so much from this that it was totally worth going through and analyzing. So the first thing I'm going to look at from this analysis is looking at the impact levels. Now, the impact levels, when the stewards go out to sites, we ask them to tell us the level of change at the site. And one of the things that we use that level of change for is to understand how big of an impact or change has happened. And we wanted to see how much sites were changing over time, just on a large scale. Now, just so you know what the impact levels are, 0 means that there's no change. 1 means that there's minor changes like trash and things like that. 2 means that the site's been disturbed, things have been moved around, there's collectors' piles and stuff. And then 3 means there's actually damage. And 4 means there's looters at sites actively damaging it when the volunteers find it. So what we found when we finally got to looking at it was the wonderful thing. I think we calculated that over 67%, if not a little more, was 0 impact. We didn't see hardly anything. Then you can imagine the next one being minor changes. That was the next biggest one, which was great. Sites disturbed, there wasn't as many as we thought, so there aren't as many impact level 2s. Impact level 3s happen a lot more rarely. And then impact level 4s, in the 10 years we were looking at it, about 7 reports had an impact level 4 on them. So, and a lot of times the stewards would say things like they'd run into somebody who was collecting artifacts and didn't realize what it was. We haven't had, as far as I remember, we haven't had anybody we were watching who actively was doing it for nefarious reasons. But we're always super careful when we do this. Okay, so then looking at impact levels over time. Now, something to realize is that in 2014, because the programs, the Clark County program and the statewide program combined together, we had a lot more people involved. So we had a lot more reports that were submitted that year. And then they kind of balanced out from there. And so the interesting thing is, if you look at the level of impacts, no matter which one you're looking at, the amount of severe impacts have not increased significantly. You do see a little bit of the looters at sites, but to be honest with you, we've kind of stayed pretty even since 2015 when it comes to how much, how different the impacts are. Things are not getting worse. That was the biggest takeaway from this, is things are not getting worse. We are still seeing about the same level of damage to sites, or maybe a little less than we have in the past. Okay, so the monitoring form, now we're going to look at the types of impacts or damage to the sites. These types are checkboxes on the monitoring report that the volunteers fill out when they go to the sites. And we wanted to take those and really look at what are the main things to be concerned about. And we were totally not surprised that the biggest one was graffiti. We see graffiti all the time. I processed 2 reports today, or Tara and I processed 2 reports today that had enough graffiti that we sent it to the agencies to say, hey, by the way, this is happening. That is the main one. The other one that we find that's pretty big is the tracks and trails. So it means that people are creating new tracks and trails at sites. And if you look at the statistics, and I don't have them with me, but if you look at the statistics of ATV usage and ATV being bought and off-roading usage, we're actually we have been seeing since the 1980s a gradual increase, or in some case significant increase, of use of those. As we see that, there are people who are going out there and they've got their new ATV or whatever, and they're going through a wash, and they don't realize when they go up on the hill, they drive right over a site and they drive back, and they're not necessarily doing it for bad reasons. Though we've seen ones where they've made new tracks because the BLM closed the road, and somebody was like, nope, we're still going to have a road, so they just drove around it and things like that. But for the most part, I think that some of the tracks and trails is simply people not realizing quite where they're at and that they're going over sites. But graffiti obviously was really intentional. Camping and evidence of camping and things like that at sites, that included things like campfires that we found or remnants of campfires and stuff that we find at sites. That does make sense as well. We see a lot of that. So we weren't surprised if you look through this list of different types of impacts that these levels were as they are. Now, the nice thing was the excavation is not that high. And if you look at the number of visits, it's not that significant. I think that and surface damage was a little more, but I think the fact what we need to look at when we're looking at this is consider how do we handle the big ones, and then the little ones might make them, might become less if as we go. So I wanted to look more at graffiti because that was the big one. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they think graffiti just is getting worse and worse every year. So we looked at the impact levels of or the amount of graffiti damage that was reported over time. And we found that actually the percentages of graffiti at sites has gone down over the years. When without like without looking too far into it, we were able to at least see that it's been pretty stable. It's gone up and down, but it's not going up anymore. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be happening. It just means that it's happening at a fairly regular pace. Then when we look at the actual trends of graffiti impact over the years, and we're looking at the bar graph, we see that for the most part, the graffiti that we see, the percentages are about the same as they have been in 2014. Like, we're not seeing significant increases in how much graffiti is happening and or how heavy it is. There are a couple of places where we've had some significant people actually out there doing graffiti, but for the most part, we don't tend to find the people actually doing it, one, and two, it doesn't look like it's getting significantly worse. So at the very least, we can pat ourselves on the back and realize graffiti is not getting worse, but we still need to worry about it because it is the biggest impact. Okay, so the Site Stewardship Program works with federal, state, and local government agencies throughout Nevada, and all of these partners, for each of their areas, we actually looked at which ones were having the most impacts. So when we were looking at it, what we realized was that possibly because also some of the largest numbers of people reporting live in southern Nevada, but Red Rock has by far the most impacts. And if you think about Red Rock Canyon, and if you've ever been driving through there or hiking through there, you'll probably have noticed that there is graffiti on the rocks. I've even seen moms take pens out of their car or out of their purse and give them to their kids so the kids could go draw on the rocks and leave them alone for a little while. It does happen. It's so heavily populated that they had to make it so you have reservations only during the better times of year, like the better weather times of year. So that level of visitation is definitely having an impact on how much damage is happening at sites. The Las Vegas area in general is the next largest, with Gold Butte National Monument being the next one. So as we look at all these different ones, we're starting to see, like, okay, well, there's certain sites or certain areas where we're just seeing a large amount of this, but how do we handle it? And so that's something that needs to be addressed and will be, as now that the government shutdown is over, I can actually start going to the agencies themselves and talking to them about these statistics and things and seeing if there's anything that they can do we can do as a group maybe, or they can do themselves, as to how to address these things. But we're well aware that, it's like in some areas where there's high visitation, we're going to see impacts. So looking at each agency partner, I did look at how the data for individual ones. And so you're going to see things like in the Las Vegas area, the biggest thing is the biggest impact is graffiti, with the next one being tracks and trails. And that kind of makes sense. In Lake Mead, the biggest one that we have actually is fence issues. And then you get some graffiti and tracks and trails and stuff like that. Um, then you get in Red Rock, by far, the biggest thing is graffiti. And I'm not surprised at all for that one. And in Gold Butte National Monument, also the biggest thing by far is graffiti. I think sometimes if you actually think about how many petroglyphs are at sites and things like that, how many different sites you have, and just where the populace is, I think that that's directly affecting how much impact each site, each area does have. So, like I said, I'm going to be working with the individual agencies to talk to them about how we can address these things, and maybe we could help with trying to come up with new ideas for them. I think there are ways. Okay, so the top 10 sites, just in case you were wondering, what are the worst sites in Nevada when it comes to impacts in general? And we found that Whitney Pockets, which is at Gold Butte National Monument, has the most impacts of all the sites that we have. Brownstone Canyon, which is in Red Rock Canyon National Recreation Area or Conservation Area, has the next largest. And then going down from there, most of these are in southern Nevada. With one, the Carson Pass Immigrant Road, which is in northern Nevada, actually in Alpine County, which is just over the border in northern Nevada. And the Carson Pass Immigrant Road, we also get a ton of data because our stewards all live right there. And so we have a significant amount of information about it. And I think that that kind of reflects that. But the rest of these are all in southern Nevada, which says a lot, since our majority of our population is here. So then looking at those sites and looking at what are the impact types that are majorly affecting them, we see graffiti for some of these, and then for things like Brownstone Canyon, which I'm so glad is not the high of graffiti, it tends to be more about tracks and trails. When we get reports, especially people making new roads to get around the access restrictions that we have at Brownstone Canyon. And then most of the rest of them are all about graffiti. So I think that something we need to consider is ways to encourage people not to do so. That we can do even if we're not standing there. So if you have any ideas, I'm always welcome to ideas for that. So something we did after we were looking at, okay, well, we'll look at all the sites and we'll look at all this stuff. We had an idea of looking at impact category by site type. We didn't really expect anything specifically different, but found some things that we thought were surprised about. So obviously rock inscription sites, the majority of stuff that you see is graffiti as a damage. Historic town sites have impacts of all kinds. There's not one that's standing out. I think people, and I've seen videos and pictures and things, people don't behave well when they go to historic town sites. There's some people who do, but there's a lot of people who don't. You can find pictures of people hanging off of structures and doing various different things around them. And I think that that is what gets reflected here. But one of the things that I really thought was interesting was that when we look at the historic, like the mining sites and the dams and the cemeteries and things like that, we're starting to see some other things that come up besides graffiti. So camping at the mining sites, there's a lot of people who go to the mining sites and camp. I think it's because you have to drive out to get to them and things like that, and it's not necessarily a bad place to camp. But then you're getting at dam sites, you get most tracks and trails, and camping again is a big one. So people like to go out to historic sites and camp, apparently. And you see camping as well when you're looking at even the rock shelters and things like that. So I think that camping is another issue that, maybe we can find alternatives for. And then fencing at cemeteries. I have that all the time. We have a bunch of cemeteries in our program where the wild horses and burros like to take down the fences regularly. So, and I'm sure there's some other things in here that we can pull out as we go. But these were the main things that Stephen and I were seeing when we were trying to go through this. Oh, okay. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our steward program in general, and what the statistics showed from us and how the program is going. So volunteering rates in the US have been going down since the pandemic. Um, Basically, I think some of it actually just happens to be like people. I know we had a bunch of stewards who went and had to get new jobs and new work, or had like they had retired, but now they're back to work and things like that. That's probably part of it. And then some of it's cultural. We're finding that the younger generations are just not brought up to do the volunteering as much as somewhat older generations were. That doesn't mean that people don't. It just means that it's one of those things of people are not thinking about it as much. So something we noticed, now, once again, I'm going to remind you, in 2014, a program doubled in size. And so you have to kind of meet equilibrium of how much you can manage after your program doubles in size. But something that I thought was really interesting. So this slide, or this graph, shows that the site stewards, so if you look at the blue bars, that the site steward numbers have gone up and a little bit down over the years, but that's okay. Then the green, the number of sites visited, maybe it has gone down a bit. And then if we're looking at the site visit numbers, so that's the orange ones, yes, we can see that they've gone down, but now in the last 4 years, it's kind of leveled out a bit. And then something that was interesting is that blue lines, it's site visits per steward. Now, if you look on the right-hand side where it says visits per steward, what it's saying is that in 2014, we had stewards going out 3.5 times, or 3 times a year. And now we've got stewards going out 2 times a year. And I think that also probably reflects the economy as well, of whether or not people have the money for the gas, because gas prices have gone up and down. And I'm sure that if we put them in here, we'd see a relative relationship. But also just the fact that people don't have as much time. They don't have as much money. And so it's a little harder for them to be able to go out. But this is really kind of been interesting to see just how much we've been trying to do, because we've been trying to, at least keep the same when it comes to the sites visited and the number of stewards. But it's been interesting to see how different the volunteerism has changed over time. So just to repeat, most impacts are minor, if any. Clark County has the most impacted sites. Graffiti is the largest impact. Relative percentages of graffiti have not changed over the last 10 years. Rock inscription sites are the most visited and heavily impacted. Number of stewards dropped during the pandemic, but is now stable. Yeah, I didn't actually show you guys that, but yes. And then the number of site visits declined up to and through the pandemic, and is now stable as well. So the program is doing pretty good with its stability, but there are plenty of sites in our database that still need stewarding. So if you do want to take on some more work, we're always happy to have help. Okay, so what do we do with this data? That's the next question. Like, okay, I've read this to you, but who cares? So one of the things we want to do is we want to use it for public education and outreach. We can use this data to be able to focus on what kind of things we need to talk to the public about. We need to have more conversations about graffiti. We need to have more conversations about when you're off-roading, trying to stay on trails, things like that. And I know that land managers are trying to do this, but I think that maybe we need to figure out other ways to be able to present it to the public. And so there's 2 different types of outreach. There's direct and there's indirect. And the direct outreach is when we are actually standing in front of somebody telling them, hey, we should be doing this education and outreach. We are telling you how to do this. You're at a booth and we're telling you how to preserve things and things like that. And then we have the indirect stuff, which is the stuff that you're going to find when you go into a kiosk at a site, and it has, a sign-in sheet, and it's got brochures and things like that, and that kind of outreach. And so what we have to think about is, how do we present it in those two different situations? And I'm not saying that we're doing it badly in any way whatsoever. I'm just saying maybe we need more of it. And we might be able to use this to help focus what kind of things we need to be talking about in it. It's a whole new way of looking at things. Preventative and responsive measures. So one of the things that the agencies or land managers need to be thinking about is, how do we prevent these specific types of impacts from happening? And how do we prepare to respond to the ones that are happening? So the preventative stuff, we had a cemetery that was in northwestern Nevada, and people were driving their ATVs and their Jeeps and stuff right over the tombstones. So NVFCP, which is one of the sponsoring organizations for this speaker series, got a grant to actually go and put up signage and fencing to be able to discourage people from taking motor vehicles through the cemetery. And they put in a whole bunch of information on how to preserve the site and how to help them out, and some history and things while they were doing it. So it was a mixture of things by putting up all the signage, and the signage has worked. It's done a really good job of protecting those sites. So there are ways to do it. We just need to think about where to do it. So that was an excellent response, or preventative and responsive measure. Other responsive measures is making sure that you have the equipment necessary to be able to preserve different sites. And you have people trained on graffiti removal and stuff like that to be able to help out with doing all of that. And then others is maybe making certain sites public or more interpreted, or making visitation better or easier, or moving visitation away, depending upon what kind of impacts you're having at sites. And if there's ways to do it where it's kind of not really pointing out that you're doing it, it's not a bad idea. For instance, at Basin Range National Monument, they have Mount Irish, which is a great site to go to. It is interpreted, it's got signage, it's got campsites. Now, before the campsites, I was looking, one of the things that before they installed these beautiful campsites with these beautiful like views and bathrooms and all of that, they actually had impact where people were camping inside the archaeological sites. But when they installed just a couple of campsites that are just within walking range of those sites, it means that more people are camping at the campsites and less people are camping inside the archaeological sites. I'm not going to say none, because I did see at least one campfire near the archaeological stuff, but it's one of those things of, let's think about ways to, if people are going to camp there anyway, maybe we should provide them a space to do it, so that way they're not going to do it where we don't want them to do it. So that was a really ingenious idea to be able to do. And they also have some really great signage talking about helping preserve things, and helping to suggest how to best interact with the sites and the beauty of the area. And so when thinking about things like this, things that kind of hint at, please don't do these things, without saying, please don't do these things, and maybe giving them another source to be able to do stuff with, or other things to be able to do by saying, hey, you can take pictures of these specific things, and so on and so forth. As you guys can see, the protect and preserve sign came from somewhere else, because it is talking about burials and stuff like that. Mount Irish does not have the burials. It's just an example of another management method in order to be able to direct people without telling them a ton of don't do this, don't do this. They have a little bit, but most of it is kind of like, here's other ways to protect it, and please help us report it and things like that. So that was a really creative idea, and I think that it's an excellent idea to be consider if you're trying to figure out, how do I keep people from camping in my site? And I think as we look at the data and we see all these different impacts, we can actually go site by site and start going, okay, well, what's a management method to be able to redirect this? And I'm going to do a bunch more research on it because I really want to know what other people are doing elsewhere, and maybe try to think of ways not only to figure out ways to prevent it necessarily, but also maybe to be able to get a grant to be able to do some things that will help the land managers present it. But we'll see. That's a future thing. Right now, we're just kind of looking at the data and going, what can we do at this moment? Okay, so if you don't already know and you're not part of the stewardship program, we do encourage you guys, when you do see any sort of damage, to report it as general citizens. You can go to our shippo.nv.gov get involved /report page. We also have, you can also send us emails or call us, and go on to our report damage to sites page and send us a note. We also have an app for that. I did not put it on here. I will, if you're interested, I can put it in the chat later. Or you can send me an email and I will send you all the information you need to be able to do this, and then have an app on your phone to help you do this. Otherwise, I want to thank Stephen again for doing all the statistics and putting together a lot of the graphs and things. I want to thank Tara Wagner, who helped introduce this, but also who helped us just be able to organize all of this and figure out kind of how to analyze it and stuff. And then I want to thank all the site stewards. For the last at least 10 years, if not longer. We are going to try to expand it because the program has been around for close to 20 years. We're going to try to see if we can expand it by going through the old data and trying to figure out the best equivalencies to be able to see those really long-term trends. But for right now, at least we've got a basic starting point. So thank you all for going out and spending your time and spending your money and going and doing all this stuff for us. We deeply appreciate it. Otherwise, yeah, if you're not part of the stewardship program, we invite you to be part of the stewardship program. This is just some of the stewards having fun. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can answer any questions people have.
Yay! Thank you, Samantha.
Okay, so let's go with the questions.
Thank you, Nick. If anybody has any questions, I'm checking chat and also the Q&A, but chat's pretty much open.
Okay. Okay, I'm reading the Q&A. So we heard about an idea about specifically educating OHV enthusiasts to understand cultural sites and be helpful protectors, rather than thinking about OHV riders as bad guys. Is it possible to plan? Is this a possible plan for SHPO to help with? I think it's possible. Since the stewardship program doesn't do OHV itself, there's always a little bit of space between that. But I think it's possible. The other way we're also doing it is NVFCP does do active outreach with OHV groups, and they have been doing a lot of education on their part. So sometimes there's certain areas in which I lean towards letting the nonprofit do it, mostly because they have a lot more time to do it. But I think that even NVFCP will be able to take some of this data and be able to work more with them to do that stuff. The next one I see, some places like Whitney Pockets have specific campsites. I'm curious whether camping numbers include illegal camping. Actually, the camping numbers that I gave you were entirely illegal camping. That they were impacts. So they were times when people were reporting camping in places where they shouldn't be. So yes, we were looking at the illegal camping based on whether the steward saw somebody doing it, whether there was camping, some sort of evidence of camping in various different ways. And so all of that got integrated together into that.
Got one
Okay.
in chat. So it says, what sites are available in Southern Nevada, and do you limit the number of sites per person?
We have a lot of sites in Southern Nevada. I think we have close to 200. And it's as long as you are active and participating and you want to steward more than one over time, and you're able to do it, then that's wonderful. We don't limit it necessarily unless we're not getting any reports, because then we're like, well, why? Site data is restricted especially on federal lands. And so we want to always make sure that we don't tell everybody everything, but we will share. As you become a steward, we will definitely assign you to sites. And if you want more, we're usually okay with giving you more. So. Okay, any other questions? Terry and Karen, thanks. Blazer too, I appreciate that.
Give Blazer a smooch from us.
All right. So with the stewardship program and the stuff and this data, I know it's more about management than it is about the average public and statistics and stuff like that. So I realize that a lot of what we're doing is a lot of this is kind of dry management stuff. But I think that in the end, it's going to be helpful on a larger scale. And so I think that using these statistics, we could use these statistics to figure out kind of and try to encourage or discourage certain activities by saying, okay, well, now we know that it's happening this regularly, then we need to do something about it. So I'm hoping that just this having the data there will have an impact for land management in Nevada across the board. And so the more data we collect, the better. So the more stewards go out to sites and report on them, the more information we have. And right now, for all those who are site stewards or anything like that, if you guys, even if you're not site steward, if you have sites that you like to go to, since the government was shut down, one of the things that we had last time there was a government shutdown was there was actually entire areas in like national parks and things like that that were massively looted during the shutdowns. So I encourage you, even if you're not a site steward, but if you have your favorite site to go to or anything like that, go out to them, check them out, see what condition they're in. Let us know if they're in what condition they're in, because then we know, okay, we don't have to worry about that. It's in good condition. It will, and we can just keep going from here. But it would be interesting to see just kind of if there was any impact to the fact that we just had the longest government shutdown in history. I'm hoping we don't. I'm hoping everything looks good, but just in case. And if you aren't a steward, like I said, you can always report stuff to us anyway, because we are trying to keep a long-term record for all these sites. And so this data builds on other data and helps us know what the long-term lifetime impacts and support and things that are needed for these sites. Okay, I'm gonna stop to stop going over this. But I want to thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you for letting me come and chat and tell you a bit about what we're doing.
Yay! Thank you very much, Samantha. This is such insightful information to be able to share. It's nice to know for anybody who's here as a steward to know that your stuff does matter, and this is the way that it does matter. Not just reporting and getting somebody taken care of through the law, but also to know ways that we can prevent those things from happening in the future. So honestly, this is amazing work. you and Stephen should be extremely proud. You're welcome.
Okay. So have a good weekend, everybody.
Yep. Have a good weekend. Have a good night. You guys take care of yourselves.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you for coming by.